Good evening. I'd like to open the November 12th, 2019 Board of Selectmen meeting, and I'll start with a statement. As required by open meeting law, you are hereby informed that the town will be video and audio taping as well as live broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience who plans to video audio tape this meeting must notify the chair prior to the start of the meeting. Is anyone so inclined? If not, I'll ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We opened our meeting at 6 o'clock, then went into executive session in which we discussed the dispatch negotiations and salary, and we voted to that end. So they'll be moving ahead with their contract with negotiations with salaries going forward. We also reviewed a litigation matter which is ongoing and may be ongoing for apparently some weeks. From that then, I'll ask for a weekly briefing. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, before I get to that, if I could just alert the board to some addenda documents that you should have available to you under your agendas. The first addenda is related to the upcoming hearing on the tax rate. That was material provided by the finance director in response to Selectman McCaskill's question. You'll see that there is a copy of item E under new business, showing that all departments are, as required, have signed that document. We also received an email this afternoon from David Young at CDM Smith regarding actions taken by both Dennis and Yarmouth relative to peer reviews that'll come up. So those are all in your packets, as well as a copy of the signature page for the Champion Salt contract, which will come up later on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The update for the sewer construction work is as follows. For the week of November 11th, the mainline sewer crew number 1 continues installation on Route 39, operating west from Spence's Trace, which necessitates a detour. Mainline sewer crew number 2 continues installation on Route 137. Again, detours there. The 2-week look ahead for next week, starting November 18th. The mainline sewer crew number 1 will continue on Route west from Spence's Trace, again utilizing a detour. Mainline sewer crew number 2 will continue on 137, again utilizing detour. And the 3-week look ahead, which is important because that's the week of Thanksgiving. First, there will be no work conducted on Thanksgiving or on the day after. However, that week the mainline sewer crew will continue installation on Route 39 west from Spence's Trace, now working on service and sideline stubs at that point. And mainline sewer crew number 2 will commence installation on Ellis, which is scheduled to be for 3 days only.
Joe, do you have any feedback? Probably not, so it's an unfair question, but do they feel they're on schedule at this point?
I haven't had conversations with anyone, but I can certainly follow up tomorrow and then report out to the board.
Just an update of what their sense is.
Sure, absolutely.
Michael?
If we could add any change orders that have been submitted to that as well, that request.
I do know that at least one change order will be coming before the board. Next week, it was submitted previously by Chief Clark, so we'll have at least one, and I'll be looking for others.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything, Joe, even.
Sure, absolutely.
Yep. Thank you, Joe. Anyone else for public comment? Carolyn, you have no public comment? Don't scare me.
I just wanted to remind everyone that this is, we have a week and a half left to drop off the packages for Cape Cod Cares for Our Troops so that we can pack those and get them to where they need to go. And please remember, everything that you donate stays or goes to a person who is serving from the Cape. So really appreciate all the help. We have a few boxes full already, but could always use more. We're all fortunate that we can be here around family and friends and people doing a lot of good for us elsewhere. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Anyone else for public comment, announcement?
Jamie.
Oh, I'll get the camera.
Jamie Goodwin, Channel 18. This goes along with the sewer construction update. We sent the Channel 18 drone down on 137, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Caleb flew it over the deep trench and down into the trench, so we're just waiting for Robert Hour to give the okay for us to air that. So keep an eye on our social media page and the homepage of the website, and we'll post that video this week.
Okay, fantastic.
It's remarkable footage, Mr. Chairman. Nice camera work.
Yeah. Move on to the consent agenda. Steve, you want to handle this for us?
Sure. A, minutes, May 28th, 2019 regular session. B, vote to approve Caleb Chase Fund request in the amount of $800. C, vote to accept the resignation of Gary C. Miller, Harwich Accessibility Rights Committee, effective 10/31/19.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Moving on into public hearings, presentations. This is decision, property will be taxed at the same rate for fiscal year 2020, set forth in Chapter 40, Section 58, the Massachusetts General Laws. Mr. Waystack.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Powers. Richard Waystack on behalf of the Harwich Board of Assessors. I'm accompanied tonight by the Vice Chairman, Bruce Nightingale, and Jake Kavanaugh, our third member, along with our Director of Assessing, Donna Molino. I'm honored to be standing before you for the 14th year as the Board of Assessors makes a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. And for Mr. Ford, I don't know if you understand the process that we've utilized. The board has the final decision on how we tax our taxpayers in the community. The board has been kind enough for my 15 years on the board to allow the board to make, the Board of Assessors to make a recommendation to the board. You have the ultimate decision. We make a recommendation based on a lot of research, a lot of due diligence, looking at a number of different factors. This year, you've heard communities across the Cape, a couple of communities, have looked at residential exemptions. We've looked very carefully at that, and the board attended a presentation by the Department of Revenue 2 weeks ago up in Eastham. And it talked about the process of setting a tax rate for the communities, but also delved into the residential exemption. We understand many of the factors that go into creating various exemptions, but we came to the same conclusion that we have for many, many years now, is that we're going to recommend to the board a factor of one, that we tax all of our property at the same rate, that we do not grant an open space exemption, that we do not grant a small commercial exemption, most importantly, that we do not grant a residential exemption. There are a number of factors for that. I'm happy to get into it if you'd like, but it's extensive. And when we change the tax rates and offer residential exemption, we create different factions. Our board is charged with establishing a fair value of this community, and we're now valued at almost $6 billion. We represent all of the taxpayers and all of the residents of this community. And trying to treat all of our residents and all of our taxpayers the same can be difficult. And I heard a phrase that was used recently by someone in the industry, that a tsunami of residential exemptions is going to overtake the Cape and the Commonwealth. But when I hear that, and looking into the data behind it, there are 351 communities in the Commonwealth. Only 16 communities have a residential exemption. I don't mean to bring up our soon-to-be interim town administrator, but he came from a community that implemented a residential exemption recently. It's not gone well. It's created somewhat of a class warfare factions in the community. it allows us to allow a certain percentage of your assessed value to be set aside, exempted from taxation. If we do so, we create a new tax rate. If it was a 10% or 20%, if we exempted the first $48,000 to $100,000 of value, it would increase taxes on other people, and it would increase taxes on other residents. So all of the residential taxpayers of the community would take advantage of a residential exemption. So never mind what it does to others who are maybe not utilizing the services of the community as second homeowners, but it will impact people who are currently residents year-round, who have a value that's greater than a certain number based on what we decide for a residential exemption. So for the 15th year, I will make that same recommendation, that we vote a factor of 1, that we do not allow either an open space, residential, or social exemption. And I'm here to answer questions either from you or from the community. And please understand, tremendous number of hours has gone into our discussion. Bruce Nightingale is our hawk when it comes to exemptions. And we spend talking about it. And from that discussion that started 3 to 4 years ago, we filed legislation 3 years ago in the House. And it was approved, allowing us one of the highest senior tax exemptions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Our senior residents, if qualified, can get up to $3,000 off of their tax bill. I'll be coming back to you later this evening to talk about the state of our board, and I'll be talking about, as we set our tax rate, what it's going to be, what the impact is going to be. I'm happy to discuss that now as we look at what the rate is for next year proposed, because it has not, as of yet, been certified by the state. But there will be some surprises there, and you should be aware of it, because it's going to have an impact across the entire community. So, Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
In that regard, you've given us some, in the packet, some draft, I think especially on the,
In fact, I'm going to, if I can, Mr. Chairman, I'll pass out some history of that tax rate.
it might be worthwhile just to give us some of the information.
I'll be
on that.
happy to. Can we pass those out, Joe? The value of our community, as I mentioned, was close to $6 billion, and our overall increase in value normally shows us that as the value of the community rises, we by law may not increase levy by the increase of market value of a community. Normally, when you see an increase in value, you see somewhat of a corresponding decrease in the tax rate. And that is not proposed this year. We're looking at actually an increase in the tax rate with an increase of the value of the community. And I need to remind you, and I need to remind the taxpayers of this community, is that the board is responsible for the valuation of the community and is responsible for the abatement and the regulatory dealing with abatements and credits. We do not deal with the spending of the community. The bottom line is that our tax rate will be increasing by 6 cents per thousand, directly related to the spending that's been authorized at town meeting. As our value has gone up by over 5% in the community, this is the first time in my history here on this board that we've seen a corresponding increase in the tax rate. And I say this so that people be aware, when the next tax bill is sent out, probably right after Christmas, and what a terrible Christmas present it is, people have the opportunity to challenge the value of their property through the abatement process. And it's imperative from the board's perspective and the staff perspective that people understand an abatement application is not to challenge what you're paying in taxes. The abatement process is to challenge the value of your property. So when people get their tax bills and they see their taxes going up, they see that the tax rate has gone up, they see the value of their property at an average across the board has increased by 5%. The average property in town right now is $568,000. If you own an average property in town, your tax bill will be going up by over $260. Again, it is imperative that I remind everyone here and everyone in our community, the Board of Assessors are responsible for the market valuation of the community, not for what people are paying in taxes. That is a responsibility of every taxpayer who attends town meeting. Is that a brief
It
enough
does.
summary?
Just to restate what you've said, our increase in taxes is based on the average value and assessment increase plus the increase in tax rate.
The average property in town is about $568,000. The tax increase for
I'm saying
that
it's
property.
It's addition of both of those is what,
Correct. Bottom line is,
I just
the
wanted.
town has to fund its services. Obviously, we're restricted by Proposition 2.5. The actions taken at town meeting dictate now what people are going to be paying in their taxes in this next tax bill.
Thank you, Richard. Michael?
And just to expand on that, Richard, there's $32 million extra that was authorized but hasn't been issued yet. So that tax increase this year isn't based on even 50% of what's already been authorized. So we have another $32 million that we're gonna spend before we go back to town meeting this year, which will do what I hope we can come up with soon on what tax rate we're gonna have next year and the following year. And as we vote things at town meeting, or at least as the board proposes them, they can propose them with what the tax impact's gonna be to the residents.
You have in front of you the summary that the department provided you. And I think it's important to know, if you look at the averages, and these are strictly just averages, if I may, the average increase from 2017, the average property was $475,000. The average increase in the taxes for that property was $85. In 2018, the average value of the average home in Harwich increased to $506,000. That year, the increase in taxes was $195. Last year, the increase of the average property was $542,000. Last year, the average increase in the tax bill for that property was $242. This year, we're up to $568,000 in an average property, and your tax is $262 increase. Please, and I do this for a reason. The assessing office in the department downstairs has no impact whatsoever on the increase in taxes that people are paying. And the reason I state that is that last year we saw there was a $242 increase in taxes for the average property. The office got inundated, why are you raising my taxes? The assessing office nor the Board of Assessors had anything to do with increasing anybody's taxes. What we do is have a fair evaluation of this town's property value. Close to $6 billion now, up 5.1% over last year. Spending is dictated either here or at town meeting. Those are the only two places that can authorize spending. We have no right to do so. The Director of Assessing and her department has no right to do so. So that when you get those bills and people start to file those abatement applications, I have to pass on that discussion somewhere else. We can look at the valuation, but we cannot look at the increase in taxes.
Michael?
Still gonna complain to Donna. Richard, can you?
Donna, don't listen to him if he complains to you.
Richard, can you talk about valuation for a minute?
Sure.
Let's take the middle school, for instance. Why is that building valued at $12 million?
It's a function of what the DOR requires us to do for values. It's not there.
We got an offer of $660,000, which was
Absolutely.
the only offer.
Absolutely.
So how do we keep that on the books at $12 million? And someone asked tonight earlier when we brought this up, Joe did, what do we pay for insurance on that?
What I
building
would
based-
recommend, Mr. McGaskill, is that your chairman file an abatement on behalf of the town to the Board of Assessors. We'll be happy to listen to any abatement application that's filed, as long as it's filed timely between January 1st and February 1st of next year.
Got that, Larry?
I got it.
And that would be all buildings.
That's us paying us, though.
The elementary school combo is
Yeah.
25 million.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand what these, I'd like to understand what the valuation.
It with you.
Perfect.
Some things are out of our hands, but the bottom line is that the state will dictate values of public buildings of that nature.
Yeah.
I'd love to say, sure, I'll kick it down to Carolyn, what's it worth as a community center?
Richard,
I know, I'm kidding.
Donna's getting nervous.
unrelated, Richard, this is educational. How do you arrive at private? Is that based on sales?
Strictly, we're a capitalistic society. It's supply and demand. Market dictates value. I don't dictate value as a realtor. You don't as a homeowner. The buyers technically dictate value. It's what someone is willing to spend for a qualified sale. And to
And-
define a qualified sale, it's a non-interested buyer and a non-interested seller.
And so when you arrive at the 560 number, that's based on sales?
Average sale. And those
Average
sales
sales.
occur basically a year prior.
Okay.
And that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great reminder for those who are filing abatement. When someone comes in, well, in December, my neighbor just sold a house for X. Those values are derived from a year ago. We have a third-party contractor that verifies these values for us. It's Capinos and Associates, who are basically the best in the business when it comes to it. And we've been able to downsize staff, allowing them to take over some of that valuation process for us. They do an excellent job, and we're getting a lot of bang for the buck there.
Anything else, Richard? Now I'll entertain a motion. Anyone care to
And I
take a
believe you
stab?
have, Mr. Chairman, the motion in your packet.
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah. Ed?
it's right here. I move that we, one, select a factor of 1, taxing all property at the same rate. 2, that we do not grant an open space exemption. 3, that we do not grant a residential exemption. And 4, that we do not grant a small commercial exemption.
Second.
Second. Before we vote, does anyone in the audience have a comment? Question? I'm sorry, you have to use the mic.
Kelly Burkhardt, I live on Sugar Hill Drive. I just have a question. You first started out saying that when there's an increase in the property overall, that there's usually a decrease in tax rate. So can you just explain that and why we're going up and not down?
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
normally is the key word there. When you see, by law, by statute, we cannot use an increase in value to increase the tax levy limit. The town, there's a very intricate formula of how much the town can tax. And we cannot say, well, we're going to raise the value of the town so we can raise taxes for the community. The formula that is actually dictated by our finance department and our finance director tells us what our levy limit is each year based on that valuation. Okay, and the state law dictates that we cannot increase our levy limit, the amount that we can tax, by more than 2.5% a year unless voted by the taxpayers at an override or a capital exclusion. So we're at a levy limit, and normally if the value goes up, the tax rate goes slightly down because we cannot increase the levy limit. However, at town meeting, if those who attend town meeting wish to expand spending, they have a right to do so. And when the selectmen make a recommendation for an exclusion or an override, it is then put out to the general public to vote if they wish to exclude from that Proposition 2.5 and increase the spending even higher. And that's exactly what has happened this past year, is that the limit that they've allowed to spend has gone up far greater than the levy limit would normally allow. So while we normally go down in tax rate when the value goes up, we continue spending and it's above that normal limit, This is a perfect example of why your tax rate will increase. It's sort of the perfect storm. People have decided in this community that they're willing to spend more, and now it's like my wonderful member of the board, Mr. Kavanaugh, said, you're at the grocery store at town meeting, and you're buying all these groceries. We're here tonight at the checkout counter, and now you got to realize what we're spending for the groceries that we bought. And we spent at town meeting, and now we're seeing the consequences of that spending in our tax bills. I hope that answers your question.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To take this out of the allegories category here, in answer to your he's right, we borrow things, but just be really clear that where we're at right now does not include the borrowings that we authorized in 2018 for the $24 million sewer system, the $5 million fire department, and our pro rata of the debt for the tech school. Those are going to come in January.
Sure.
Sandy McClarty. As a question as to the 1-to-1 ratio for residential homes, we're talking about, I guess, what like Provincetown has done, where they tax year-round residents different than part-time residents. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And my question is, out of the 16 communities that have opted in, have they all been disasters? What has been the outcome on average? And then my comment as to trying to keep it fair, I think the argument I've heard for I don't know if it's a progressive tax system, but for that unequal rate would be that a smaller percentage of somebody's income has to be spent for necessities by a wealthy homeowner versus somebody who's at the lower end of the spectrum. So a different way of looking at the fairness would be to look at kind of the cost to surviving on the Cape. And that's why maybe communities like Provincetown, who need a workforce and don't have one, would be more interested than, say, somewhere else in Massachusetts on the mainland. So just a response on the 16 communities.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I may, excellent point. And let me talk about that for a moment. We've had that discussion over the last 3 to 5 years. Fairness, I have to go back to data. Okay. If we were to do a residential exemption, that would impact about 5,200 properties in town. We have approximately 12,000 properties in town. So that would impact less than half of that. However, what we're trying to do in the fairness is help those in need in the community, whether it be older, whether it be folks with sight impairment, whether it be our honored veterans in the community. And what we've done, because we agree that we need to try to work with those groups, we went to the legislature 3 years ago to increase what we can do for our seniors who are most vulnerable, who want to age in place and stay in their homes. And so we have gotten to a point where our senior tax credit is now up to $3,000 that a senior can take advantage of. We have exemptions for folks with financial hardship, but what we found out very, very recently, that can only impact a taxpayer over the age of 65. Your board is very proactive. We're not afraid to file legislation with, obviously, your approval from town administrator and from the board to handle the young people, because we heard this discussion a couple weeks ago, that people are trying to use this as a tool for either affordable housing or trying to deal with the flight of the youth off the Cape and the younger families who are struggling to try to stay here. We plan on visiting another exemption from the Department of Revenue, which will take legislation for us to do so. When a senior comes to us, they've got to qualify under a certain level in terms of what their income is and how much they have in assets. Their home is not an asset. If they qualify, they can get, again, up to $1,500 off, and if they do a work-off program, again, a senior working for the town can get an additional $1,500 off of their tax bill. We would like to expand that. We would like to expand that to younger people, and I don't want to make this an age scenario, but maybe younger families, younger couples who are struggling to be able to afford to live here. It is not allowed under the law at this time. Our legislators file on our behalf as a local option. I would love to see it throughout the Commonwealth, but I would like at least Harwich to be at the forefront to see if we can address some of those issues through a credit for those in need under the age of 65. We've got a template in place that we can utilize, but we'll need the enabling legislation to do that. And in terms of the overall fairness, if we say, okay, we're going to let folks give them their first $100,000 off of their tax rate, well then, if your neighbor has a house valued at $800,000 to $1 million, and they're a neighbor, and maybe it's an older neighbor who's had the house for years, they're actually going to be paying much more because they're not exempt. So we will have residents who you'd think would qualify because it's a residential exemption, but they wouldn't qualify for it. So I hope that answers your question. We're trying to be proactive to assist our residents in this community, and
Michael.
we'll take that up at a further time.
Michael?
Richard, is there data available to how many towns on the Cape do offer a residential exemption?
Yes,
Can you send that to the board?
absolutely, we'll be happy
Thank
to.
you. And then just, Don, just,
And frankly, Mr. McGaskill, I believe it's 3.
okay, thank you. I just want to, I'd like to see it.
Certainly, yeah.
And then just on Don's comments, Don, if I'm reading this chart correctly, which nobody else, I think we all had it put in front of us, you mentioned Cape Cod Tech. I believe Cape Cod Tech, it says at least that it's been issued. And 879,000, that's been issued.
I was just speaking to the impact on the actual tax bill that you would have received.
Okay, and the fire station, I think all but 230,000 was issued. So I think some of that is in this tax.
I think when you open up your tax bill in January, you will find it.
Ed?
The neighbor with the 800, why would the residential exemption not qualify for them?
That's one of the misnomers of a residential exemption, because you have to have a break-even point.
Okay.
And for instance, we have a tax bill, we're looking at a proposed tax of $8.73 per thousand. If we were to offer a 10% exemption, which would exempt, in essence, $48,000 of value, the tax rate would go from $8.73 to $9.61. You've got to capture it somewhere else. There's no straight gift. You've got to recapture it somewhere. There's a levy limit. We have to utilize that levy limit. So there's a break-even point. If we did at 10% right now, the break-off point is $1 million. So if you have a resident who's lived in their home for 40 years here in the Cape, maybe it was a generational home that's down by the water, that's worth $1 million, you're going to pay far more. And I think do we provide that data for the board? I will provide data for you that will show you, Mr. McManus, exactly that breakdown.
So, but that particular resident gets the residential exemption as the tax rate plays out. They're on the upper side of the tax shift as opposed to the lower side.
The tax rate is impacted on everybody.
Yeah.
So the rate goes up.
I know.
But you're exempted that first 48,000. But in that particular scenario, just so you know, the number is $1,060,000, the value of a property. That's where now, for those people who are valued more than that, their taxes start increasing dramatically. So, and we'll provide that if you'd like. I can get a copy of this for all of you. And that's just at 10%. Many were looking at 20% plus. Those numbers change dramatically.
I understand Cambridge is at 35.
Just, and the other thing is, for people who don't understand, other communities that have used it are mostly cities where they can shift the value onto other property as to business, industrial, and commercial. We just don't have a lot of that in this community. And it's difficult for us to shift the value off of residents to either second homers specifically, or other residents who have got higher valued properties, or to commercial or industrial property. If we had it, and that's where some of the cities do that because they can make it up easier elsewhere without impacting the residents.
Okay. If no other discussion, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous? Thank you, Richard.
And could you please sign the document so that we can set this tax rate and get our bills out the end of December?
We'll do that while you, I think you're up next on the Council on Aging.
Council on Aging. Triple threat tonight, Mr. Chairman.
We're ready for it.
Pleased to stand before you on behalf of the Council on Aging. Our director is here this evening, Emily Mitchell, who you all know very, very well, who has been doing an outstanding job for us in her, just over her first year of service to the community. I submitted a report in your packet, and I don't want to read a 3-page report. You have it there. Suffice it to say that one of the tremendous investments that was made and assisted with our friends from the Friends of the Council on Aging was the My Senior software. For years, you had asked us as a board to provide the data of how many people are utilizing the services, how many people are utilizing the community center through the Council on Aging. That software has been exceptional for us. It allows us with a key tag for every person who accesses a program, including myself as a volunteer for the Council on Aging. I check in, my key fob, it tells me what I'm there for. If I'm volunteering, if I'm there for a Council on Aging hearing, if it is for someone who's attending a program or an event. We are now able to track with data. Mr. McGaskill has asked me for a year for empirical data. We now have that ability to provide the data to you to justify the budget as we come before you. It has been a game changer for the Council on Aging. The amount of older adults, which is the proper term to use these days, who are utilizing the services of this community continues to expand. We've created tremendous programs, but one of the weaknesses that we found this year is the last time any type of strategic planning was done was over 10 years ago. So we're going to be embarking on an opportunity to look at strategic planning, and I'm going to try to make it budget neutral for you so that we can look at where we're going as an organization and specifically the type of services that we need to provide for our older adults. We know that people have certain needs. People want to age in place as long as they can. There's a need for health care. There's a tremendous need for transportation. As you know, we've been dealing with that this year quite extensively. There's a need for feeding programs. We've got excellent staff, and as you read the report, you look at the impact of the volunteers who have saved us thousands and thousands of dollars in staff time that we just frankly could not put on the programs that we do without those volunteers. So, brief summary, Mr. Chairman, you have got the report in your packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And Ms. Mitchell is here, and she's very happy to answer any questions as well.
Questions for Richard?
Just a
Michael?
comment, great job to the council, to the Friends of the Council, to Emily. Great job. We hear nothing but great things about the Council on Aging.
I think we all agree with that. You've summarized it, Richard and Emily, but is there any surprises in the data that you're finding? That's my first question. My second one is in the past at least, it seems like one of our largest concerns is outreach, how to reach those people that we don't know about. In your thinking, is that improving? Are you feeling that we're getting to those people through the volunteers better than the past?
Excellent question. And a few years ago at town meeting, when I had done a report for Council on Aging prior to Ms. Mitchell coming in, I had done a report and talked about the outreach. And I had a member of our public safety fire department come up to me and say, "You really have a need for one of us." Justin White now sits on our council from the fire department. The liaisons we have with our fire department and our police department has expanded our outreach dramatically. We have a social worker on staff, and the volunteers that go out into our community, and I did it for the first time last year, delivering Christmas presents. Again, things that were donated for us to give out as presents to our older adults. I was blown away. We have our volunteers from Meals on Wheels. We have so many programs that we're working out of the community center, which is a lifeblood for many of our older adults. Out there personally experiencing firsthand the services needed for our older adults is mind-boggling. And we have been consistently with, again, Susanna Keefe, who is one of our caseworkers who's out there. We hear it from neighbors. I received a call. I attended the Harwich Men's Breakfast, and a gentleman called me and said, I know you're affiliated with the Council on Aging. I know of someone who's homeless, an older adult homeless, living in the woods in Harwich. What programs do we have? And to have the ability to pass that on to one of our staff, difference. So the outreach.
You had, we have an accessibility rights committee, used to be called disability rights. I would like to see some more interaction between your group and that group, because they're looking at how to help people be accessible rights. And that would be a.
Would
and
love
they're
to have
looking
them
for
attend
more
our
input
meetings.
From
and-
every area.
Absolutely. Mr. Howell is our liaison, and we'd be happy to have them meet. Our meetings are open, and they're quite fruitful, the meetings that we have every month. Would love to work with them, and any continued outreach that we can find, the better for the community.
Okay, thank you. Ed and then Don?
Yeah, you know, and you mentioned you participate in the Christmas gift program. One of the programs that I'm happy that the Kiwanis Club has continued is along with Friends Market in Orleans, is distribution of carrot cake, cranberry cake breads to a number of seniors around town. And last year, I made a pitch to our Key Club at our high school, and the kids did the distribution, and I thought that was very nice.
Okay. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To your point about triaging for accessibility issues, I will say, and I said the same thing when Ginny was in with the library, over the past year, there's been a substantial increase in triaging between Sight Loss Services, the library, and the Vital program, and the Council on Aging, and they're doing a terrific job.
Mr. Chairman, while I'm here, I would like to recognize one of our residents who, we had an issue with one of our vans from the Council on Aging. Basically, it died. And I want to recognize Mr. Kavanaugh for his assistance in getting us a replacement van at basically no cost until we can purchase another one. You know, it's that impact of our residents in the community who help us out, who see the need and respond to that. So I wanted to recognize him this evening.
And we share in thanking you, Jay. Very nice effort. Absolutely. Any other comment? If not, thank you very much. And Richard, we'll never let you go tonight, I guess, because you're up now on the Board of Assessors.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My report is on file. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
What's that tax rate thing again?
No, seriously, that, you know,
I think it's straightforward. Maybe just a very brief
just
summary.
really simple. And I think people need to understand, the members, Jay and Bruce and myself, we are required by state law to be certified. We have to take a course to be able to deal with the regulatory issues that we are responsible for. I will reiterate, we are an advisory board and a statutory board. We do not deal ourselves with operations of the department. That is Donna's job as the assessing director. We're there for policy. You know, as we talk about some of the proactive changes we've made, I'm proud of this board. You know, they truly have been so proactive in expanding our senior tax credit, the due diligence necessary to guard the money of this community, because we have an overlay account. You know, it's $460,000 that we utilize for our abatements and for our assistance to our community members who are in need. We are very, very diligent about that. We had a meeting early this evening, and for someone to apply for a tax credit that could be up to $3,000, the packet was that thick. Their tax returns, their bank accounts. We are guardians of that money for the community, and we take our roles very, very seriously. And so when I hear it, people say, well, it's time to change, we should maybe get some new folks, that's great. We have a full board. We work very, very diligently. We are, again, educated as to what's necessary to do. We love the work that we do. You know, we truly care about our community and our citizens, and these gentlemen, I can't thank them enough for the work that they do. They really put this community first. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If my memory serves, you have to be certified as well, right? To be,
You do, sir.
So it's not just walk in the door, it's some work involved, in addition to the meetings. And
Takes a little bit of institutional knowledge. And just so you know, when we talk about that due diligence, if anyone has come to us for assistance under a hardship exemption, we keep a record of everything that we have done over the years for those people. We know if someone's been getting assistance for 5 years or so, exactly what they've received. We know exactly where they're coming from. We update their files. Again, we truly are good guardians of the funds that have been bestowed upon us for this community.
thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone from the audience want to, this may be, this is the last shot at, I think, with Mr. Waystack.
Yeah, I'm hiding the target for another year, so it's your last shot.
After
Before
three
he
meetings.
sits down, I think it should be recognized, his recent national
Award, yeah.
award of being elected president of the,
Residential Real Estate Council. It's a 30,000 international organization of real estate professionals, and I was installed the other night as the international president.
Yeah,
So,
fantastic.
thank you very much.
Moving on then, new business, Chapter 90 project request. Joe, you want to discuss this a bit?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Actually, the request tonight of staff is going to be that the matter be held off. There's not a resultant contract that would go with this. The board could authorize the work, but the contract would have to be developed and executed with MC Dirt Works. Originally, this was going to be a procurement that the engineer and I were going to work on, put out to bid. We had to put the catch basin program ahead of that, and we simply ran out of time. So what we were going to work with the DPW director and the highway superintendent on is utilizing the Barnstable County Cooperative and out there. It's expected to be a higher cost than what we may have been able to do internally, but we're not going to be able to test that. Regardless, what you have tonight is a request for approval of Chapter 90 work, but we don't have the resultant contract that would go with that yet. I ask at this time that the board table the matter.
Let me just comment on this, because in the past, we've often used the county procurement without the supporting contract. And what I asked this time, in line, I think, with that as a board, is to go ahead and give us a contract as well, so we have that in the files. And so that's put a bit of a delay in getting that paperwork. It's not a big issue, it's just adding another step that we have our files complete. And so just to explain what's happening here, that's, doesn't prevent all the hard work that Link and Joel put into this, but we'll come back with a complete contract. Ed?
Mr. Chair, based on the Assistant Administrator's request, I move that we vote to table the Chapter 90 request, Lower County road patching, until such time as a contract has been developed.
Second.
Second? Any other comments?
Don's got something.
Don?
We don't want a date certain to take it off the table?
I'd rather have a date certain so we can do it, but to,
I don't see us being able to turn a contract around for the 18th. We can certainly try for the 25th.
I would try
However,
for,
I
I
don't
would be
know.
comfortable with December 2nd. That's the one after Thanksgiving. And that way, I know, Michael, you're gone for a week, and that gets us all, we get a full board back as well. And I'm gone part of that Thanksgiving week. December 2nd, is that okay? Edward, you go with that?
Yeah, sure.
Any other comments? Not, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
C is vote to endorse CPC grant agreement with Cape Housing Institute in the amount of $7,500. I think Joe and maybe Don, you can give some explanation of this as well.
On this one, I can't.
Okay, I'll turn it over to, you can or can't?
I know that generally, the
I don't want to put you on the spot. if you're
CDP requested the funds to defray the cost of putting on the Cape Housing Institute. And that's what this is, the grant request for.
Michael?
Is there any backup documents saying how many towns they're approaching, what the cost to run it is? like the important details?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I've not been privy to any information, nor could I find any relative to this item or the next item coming before the board.
I'd rather
I can endeavor to
also
get that.
bring this back when we have information.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine they are required to have that backup, especially CPC.
I just want to point out, it's been voted by town meeting.
It has.
This is back.
Nevertheless, it would be nice to have some backing ground information of what's going on. Michael?
This is for now as on the basis of the prior town meeting action.
Same with the next?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
They're both these.
They're disbursements
sure.
made for approved funds.
Larry?
Mary?
I might be able to shed a little light.
We would appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean,
Typically CPC, Aaron Maslowski, member of the CPC, typically the Community Preservation Committee has a grant agreement with third-party agencies. So I believe the one you're looking at was CDP, and I believe it relates to last year's funds, not upcoming funds. So it is merely putting the contract in place between the town, the Community Preservation Committee, and
That we've already committed to.
CDP that has been committed.
Okay,
But it acts as the contract between the three parties and the use of the funds.
okay. Michael, you want to?
So this is the first of the grant agreements that Dave Nixon's been mentioning.
Correct, and this is
All the
last
money
round.
that's already
And
been
if I'm correct, this is one that we signed at last week's meeting. So I believe you will see signatures from the Community Preservation Committee on this already. So that's where they
One follow-up? Why is this the first time we're seeing it? I imagine it's been reviewed by an attorney? Has the town's attorney looked at it, or CPC's attorney have a recommendation?
I
Any
believe
backup
that is
with
true, but I can't swear to that. There was talk, I know Carol, at David's request, Carol had originally used them. I believe that is the form from Copeland and Page, I believe.
I know David has been fastidious.
David has been talking about it for
yeah.
quite a while. And I believe they came from, I believe it's Copeland and Page's form. And I don't know that there were any changes that were made to those, but they came before us last week, and with David's blessing, he had asked us to sign now that they had come back from CDP.
Don?
So I don't believe there were any changes made to that form that hadn't been reviewed.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what Michael is saying, but I've seen this before in other towns' forms too. I mean, I understand you're questioning the format, but the CPC runs parallel to our jurisdiction. They've already had these on the town meeting warrant. It's already been voted. It's already been encumbered from their funds, and it is a requirement that we countersign it, the grant agreement going out, which is what this is about.
Michael?
Thank you for that explanation, but this is the first explanation that any of us are getting on this. I've been on the board for at least 4 years. We've never voted a grant agreement in those 4 years. We've never been getting, so this is a new process that hasn't been spelled out to us, is that what you're saying?
Actually, I feel like we're making progress, yes.
Maybe a presentation on this, or Dave Nixon, or town council, or somebody can just say, yes, it's okay to sign this?
Mary, can I ask you one more question? Is this time sensitive? Is there any penalty if we get some explanations?
I don't believe that there's an issue if you wait a week, and I'll ask David to
We can bring us up to speed, and then we'll understand what's going on.
My understanding was that we used to have grant agreements through CPC in years past. That hadn't happened in the last couple of years, so.
That's true, but as a board, I think we're becoming more cautious, and so some explanation would be worthwhile. Ed?
So I will communicate that to David.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I speak with the CPC chairman regularly. We can work on this and vet it through staff.
Just educate us on what's
Sure.
going on.
It's just that for this point, it has not gone through staff that I'm aware of.
Generically, they're both the same.
Yeah, right, we'll do both of them then.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah,
The first item is funding from the 2019 annual town meeting. The second item is 2018.
Okay.
So it's 2 different years of funding and 2 different actions.
right, okay, good.
Just
Steve,
as
and
a
then
comment, David has reached out, certainly to me, I
Right.
know he's reached out, relative to, you know, what CPC's process is.
Yeah.
He's been trying very hard to make sure we all understand it, so I'm
Yeah.
sure he'd be more than happy to, you know, come in and do
Oh,
it.
yeah.
I don't want to speak for him, but
I think in this case we can.
Yeah.
He'll give us explanation.
I'll
Ed?
communicate.
Well, you know,
Thank you, Mary.
in the time before I took a hiatus from being a selectman when Mr. McCready was chair of the CPC, I know we had grant agreements at that time, and as I understand it, if we have a couple of years where most of the projects are done with the, say, the Recreation Department on a project that they're doing, we don't really have a grant agreement with ourselves. We have a contract with the person that's doing it, so there may be years where we have a lot of projects approved, but there's no grant agreement generated. It's only when we deal with an outside agency. I know, you know, when we did the windows at the First Congregational Church, we had a grant agreement between the town and the church.
Thank you, Ed. So I guess, Joe, we'll bring this, we'll invite David to just educate us on this, and
Follow up tomorrow.
we'll bring this back. The next one is item E, request for approval of hawkers and peddlers license for Pilgrim Lodge. Michael?
I move that we approve the request for hawkers and peddlers license for Pilgrim Lodge to sell Christmas trees and waive associated $60 fee.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Next is request for a one-day liquor license, Wishmere Beach Club. And Joe, I think you have some information on this.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this was in response to Selectman Howell's question. There was registered through Patty that I followed up on. It wouldn't be proper for the board to grant this license because the establishment that's requesting it is a licensed establishment. Even though it's a seasonal license, the ABCC is clear that they cannot hold any other license during their dormancy period. So their license, we've confirmed, does expire on June 15th of 2020. They were requesting a one-day special license on January 15th, and a special one-day for January 18th, and it's not allowed by law. So it's not something that the board could properly approve.
Now, I read that it's pretty straightforward, so.
They could change their date or their location, but
Michael?
Who would they change their date with? Are we gonna give them an option? Do they have any options?
They haven't come, I don't know, I haven't, as far as I know, they haven't come with us. We could ask them if they, I don't know the event, whether they have,
it's some corporate event.
So the license expires on the 15th. They're trying to do an event on the 18th.
right.
Hypothetically, they could extend their license till the 20th.
unfortunately, no, not a seasonal. Seasonals are, that schedule is actually set by the ABCC.
So the only thing they could do would be to move it back until
Well-
when their seasonal license is in fact on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But the way it works, I've held a seasonal license. The way it works is the licensing authority, in this case us, has guidelines that the state issues. The licensing authority can say it could be smaller. They could say that our seasonal license expires November 30th or December 15th or whatever. But in this instance, that dark period between when the maximum amount of time for a seasonal license occurs, in this case, January 15th, can't be extended, and there's a timeout between that and the new issuance on April 1st, so nothing can happen. It's pretty straightforward. It's just, it can't happen.
So getting to Michael's point, you could suggest that they move it back so they're in their seasonal license.
Yeah, correct.
That's the only option.
Or they could find a venue that has a year-round, or,
Move it somewhere.
correct, yep.
Michael and then Ed?
Ed was first.
Ed,
Yeah,
you're keeping track better than I am.
For them to essentially run the bar for the event, it would, in this case, require them holding 2 licenses, which is prohibitive,
Correct.
can they bring in a bar service that has its own license to run the bar?
I don't believe they can do on the premises because it's a licensed premises.
And you have to certify your deliveries to come in
Right.
Yeah,
under your license.
well, that's what a bar service would do.
Yeah, but at the same
Yeah,
location.
Yeah.
Might be too cute by half of that. but maybe a good idea.
Precisely, Mr. Chairman.
I guess that's something, I mean, this is an important business to town, so I mean,
Yeah.
I guess that's something, are we gonna look into that, or do we just have them look into it? Because I don't
No,
see
we're-
why they couldn't hire mobile mixers, for lack of a better company, to come in. We grant South Harwich Meeting House liquor license, pouring licenses, we grant them all the time for one day. If they weren't the applicant, if the corporate group was the applicant, they can't get around it.
Not on the licensed premises, because the seasonal license that is issued identifies the premises. It identifies a location, it identifies an area. But to your point, Mr. McCaskill, the staff's gonna follow up tomorrow with the applicant, and we're gonna discuss options with them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just seems a shame.
That's what, yeah, it does, because you're right, they're
But
important.
this
to us.
action could have put their seasonal license in jeopardy, and we don't want that either, so.
Right, okay. So we'll leave it to you and work with Greg and gang to see what's going, or excuse me, Wishmere Beach Club. G is request, so there's no action, we'll just leave it
Correct.
in your hands.
Thank you.
Request for approval of traffic plan, cultural center holiday, Michael?
Approval of the traffic plan for the Cultural Center Holiday Light Display scheduled for 11/30/19 through 12/31/19.
Second, is there any discussion?
Maybe
Michael, Carolyn, yeah.
Carolyn could just explain what that traffic plan is to the public.
Thank you. So we were able to meet with the Deputy Chief Considine, who was able to help us. We have done the same traffic plan when we did the lights for Art Week. So you'll enter through South Street, through the elementary school. Building so that people will be able to see them. We are asking that people don't get out of their cars. We will have signs brought over. We've worked with the police on that. But it's going to be similar to how we did it during Art Week. And for those of you who have lived in Harwich or heard about it, these are the decorations from Bob Doan on Forest Street, which has been so successful in the past. But in order to make it a safer town, since that road was getting congested, we're hoping that this will help out, and great use of our $12 million building. That, just kidding. Sorry. Thank you.
I don't care, they'll give you an inch. Next two items have to do with wastewater.
There was a motion and a second, but no vote, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll vote all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimously. Since this involves CDM Smith and DHY, I'd like to postpone this until December 2nd. Dave Young couldn't make it tonight to give some explanation on this. I know between next week, Michael, you missed one, I missed the other week, so I'd like to bring this back on the 2nd, so we have a full discussion on this. Any objection, Michael?
Not objecting. I'm fine with that, but I would like to add a topic to that, Larry.
Okay.
And it really goes back to conversations we've had for years. We hired Dan Pelletier as our wastewater/water superintendent. He hasn't had a seat at the table from the beginning. And now we have Griffin Ryder, who is an engineer. And before we go voting on $20,000 contracts to other companies, maybe we should have a conversation with the in-house professionals and see what they can offer before we proceed with this.
And I'm okay with that. I will add that we did have a meeting on some of the DHY phasing, in which both Griffin and Dan Pelletier was involved. And so we're starting to include that.
Thank you. I hope that in the future they're at every meeting, because as far as wastewater goes, that's why we hired that one individual
I
and
can
the
only
other
say,
engineer.
Mike, we started it
Great.
in there, and they both had excellent input. So we're taking that. But if that's okay, I'd like to bring that back when we have a full board on the 2nd.
Sure.
Okay? Contracts, Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you and members of the board should have in your addenda list there, you'll see what represents the signature page, which we finally received late last week from the vendor. You'll see that it was signed by both the vendor and the accountant finance director as to available funds. I then will now defer back to the memo that I originally wrote on October 28th, and I would recommend that the board vote to approve this procurement as outlined, award the contract to Champion Road Salt LLC, and to sign the contract documents, which are in the signature file.
Okay.
And again, this was a procurement that occurred through a cooperative a bid process through the town of Plymouth.
Okay, good. Michael?
I move that we approve the contract with Champion Salt LLC for FY20 road salt contract in the amount of $107,780.
The second?
Second.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is actually a decrease in price from the last contract, so we actually work out
Okay.
one of those occasions where the price went down.
The motion was up to 2,000 tons,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Correct.
And again, I appreciate the effort because we have tried to be more careful on having the contract paperwork in front of us. So, thank you, Joe, and thank you, staff.
We're getting there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Take a vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. Town administrator's report.
Mr. Chairman, I really have nothing to add as Assistant Town Administrator, other than to advise the board that there were 2 departmental reports that should have been included in your packet from the Harbor Master Department and from the Health Director. Other than that, I do not have anything to add.
Okay, thank you. Selectmen, I'll start with you, Steve.
Nothing to report?
Michael? Ed?
No.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Mr. Clark goes on his leave of absence on the 15th, I was wondering if you could agenda us taking a vote in accordance with Chapter 4-10-2 of the Charter for the board to appoint an interim, which would be
I'll put that on
most likely,
next-
but
I'll put that
it
on
requires a vote
that
according to
on
the
next
language.
That we can do, Michael, and your, take that vote, I think.
It's not agenda, that's all, just say
Yeah.
next week.
Okay.
And, Mr. Chairman, if
Yes.
that matter is concluded, I apologize. There was one other item under Administrator's Report. Letters had gone out last week, apparently, from the Administrator to a number of communities regarding response to tornado. So I do have those if the board wishes to see them. I believe they were mailed out on November 8th, so those are available. I apologize for the oversight.
Okay. Don?
And would you report on your Veterans Day activities?
I was in charge of the weather. And so, and I did a fantastic.
Great job.
I did a
Good job for 24 hours.
I did a fantastic job. It was, I think, 61 degrees for Veterans Day. I've been there a lot of cold days, and it was very nice, but maybe that was it, but we had a, I think, larger turnout than I remember. And we had a, I guess, Army colonel that really gave a great speech, great in 2 ways. It was very poignant, very to the point, and not to overstate it, but very short. And it was a good event. Ed?
I do remember the year that it was so cold and the speech was so long that, if you all remember, Flash Gordon got up, walked to his car, got in, turned it on, and heater going because he was too cold.
Well, you know, those community events are always, they're nice. You run into a lot of friends. and it's a good
Acapella group
atmosphere.
from the high school was wonderful.
Those girls are terrific.
Did you look like you wanted to say something?
At some point, that would be appropriate, I think. I'm from Weston and Sampson.
You have to use the microphone, please.
Oh, yep.
Thank you. I'm from Weston and Sampson
Okay, right.
and came to talk about the 2
Right.
draft agreements in
Yeah.
front of you tonight. The second one is related to HY
Right.
and the work with them to do basically a review of the costing done not only for DHY facilities, but also for Dennis, the facilities of Dennis, the facilities in Yarmouth, and the facilities here in Harwich.
Right.
In addition to that review, the operating agreement itself, given the fact that it is in fact to be approved at some point, and the timing of this is important because I know, or I'm pretty sure anyway, and I talked to David Young earlier in the week, that both Dennis has approved this and folks from Yarmouth have approved it. And the timing of that agreement is such that the subgroup would really like to have this done by mid-December, so that the information will be there to move forward with and heading to the spring. And so I think that from the second one is something that, if possible, to get approved. Otherwise, it would in fact be delayed, given the fact that the other two communities have actually approved the project and the agreement.
Yeah, that's interesting. Don?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So we're talking about more than just the peer review agreement, that they've approved the actual DHY agreement?
No.
That's why I want to make clear,
No,
because it
this-
didn't
this
sound
specific-
like that.
No, just this specific agreement.
Okay,
that's all.
the peer review agreement.
Correct.
So if we do, if we vote on it December 2nd, is that too late for you?
Yeah, I think that in order to get it completed by the middle of December, it would be almost impossible to do. And so it would in fact be delayed.
Okay. Michael?
You can vote on it at the next meeting, can you?
We can?
Yeah, there's 4 of you, right?
Yeah. We'll bring it back next week then.
Okay,
And that way, I'll get, Dave can be here then to explain it some.
okay, thank you.
And this,
What it is, just in general, just add a bit to that. The 3 towns have agreed that independent review is important going forward. And this $18,000, I think, is your approximately for the, is the contract bid. And obviously $6,000 apiece. And we, each town agreed in our meeting that Don and I sit on to seek those funds from the towns. Ed?
yeah, so, but on our agenda, we had 2 agreements. and-
One's for each
but-
Harwich.
So this is only referring to
Only to the
item
DHY.
I.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's one of the new addenda that you had this evening. I received an email from David Young this afternoon indicating that the town of Yarmouth approved theirs last week. Dennis had
Well,
approved it back in October.
We'll bring it back, we'll bring it back next week then, so you have time to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that way I can invite Dave Young to make the quick presentation. Okay, anything else? If not, thank you. Anyone care to, I'll second it.
Second.